So first up, panelists, could you please tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you made the leap from bench to running for office?
Sure. So I'll go ahead and get started. I am originally from Northeast Los Angeles in the east side of Los Angeles. I grew up in Highland Park, Garbanzo, and Lincoln Heights. And growing up in the neighborhood, I went through a lot of different things. It's not easy when you come from a low-income background. And I ended up going to school for biological sciences. I went away for college. I went to Drexel University in Philadelphia. And I graduated at the height of the Great Recession and ended up being very fortunate to find 2 jobs at that time. I had a part-time and a full-time job. I started out doing an epidemiology study on childhood cancer, and I also had a position in flow cytometry core facility. So I spent 5.5 years working at the University of Pennsylvania in the flow cytometry core facility, and now I'm at Caltech doing similar work. I operate a self-sorting machine. But in all of that, I really got to see a lot of how policy kind of impacts your day-to-day in kind of ways that you don't really expect. And after the election of Trump, well, really before that, I saw, while I was still in grad school, just the sort of motivation that people had because of Bernie Sanders and a lot of the things that he was talking about. And a lot of people were saying, oh, he has no chance. But when you were in the school at the time, I was getting my MBA at that point in time, I saw, I knew he had a chance. And so when I moved back to Los Angeles in 2015, I volunteered a little bit on that campaign. And then I also kind of noticed that there was a lot of change happening in my neighborhood, gentrification, which is happening in cities all across the country. And I was a little bit culture shocked in my own neighborhood. So I decided I could either complain about it and, not know what to do, or I can get involved. So I joined my local neighborhood council. And from there, I just got involved in a ton of different community issues, immigrant rights. I started a committee on the neighborhood council called Culture and Equality. I made it a real priority as a neighborhood council member to make sure that people had access to information in the neighborhood. I got appointed digital communications liaison to run the social media. I ended up joining other coalitions in the neighborhood, and I got elected to the Neighborhood Council Budget Advocates, which is a citywide alliance that holds the mayor and the city council accountable to budget decisions. And eventually I got elected as one of the assembly district delegates for Assembly District 51. And I decided on all of this. I said, I think it's time to take a next step. We have biotech corridor planned in the district that I'm running in, which is LA City Council District 14. And we need somebody who has a scientific background to really be at the table when decisions about that are made. There's many other issues that in the community, like I mentioned before, I do a lot of work on immigrant rights, and everyone knows somebody who works with them in their lab, who has a work visa or a student visa and is at risk of not being able to get that renewed. And these are issues that affect us day to day. We have the housing crisis. Most postdoc salaries starting out for the first couple of years qualify you for HUD in the city of Los Angeles. And a lot of people don't realize that and how that's going to long-term affect the potential for people to get involved and stay in their positions in academia. And there's, I could talk about it for an hour, but that's in a nutshell, just kind of how I got to this room with you guys, so.
Great. I feel like I need to stand up because this is what I did when I had my stump speech. So my name is T'Pring Michelle Peccato. My dad was Italian, my mom was African American, my husband is a Filipino, and I come from a truly California family. I'm running for Assembly District 54. I actually ran during a special election, so I got second place. I don't say lost, I got second place 3 times. The special election, I lost to our now Assemblywoman, Sydney Comlager Dove, who had been experienced in her role for about 16 years. She was being trained to take on this leadership role. I actually came from a perspective where we need a variety of people helping our state have educated, thoughtful conversation among all the types of policy perspective that we have, from water to homelessness to equity and solutions that really make sense, that are sustainable. So I come from a neuroscience PhD background, and I'm used to collaborating and cooperating with multiple stakeholders at the table. So that's why I ran, and that's where I came from.
And to follow your lead, everyone. My name is Jose Trinidad Castañeda. First, I'd like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples of this land, the Hashman Nation. And just a little bit about me. I work as the Climate Policy Coordinator at the William C. Velasquez Institute in Los Angeles, Fullerton Parks and Recreation Commissioner, and I'm part of a nationwide progressive millennial network called the New Leaders Council, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. What really got me inspired wasn't just one event. It wasn't Trump's election that got me inspired to run. In 2014, I was assigned to go to a city council meeting, take notes. And so that's what I did. And that very first city council meeting shaped who I am today. Because not only did the city council vote to disapprove or not accept $2 million in funding for low-income majority schools facing diabetes and obesity, higher levels and higher rates of obesity and diabetes within those schools, but they also banned marijuana. They were just talking about the most nonsense, irrational things I could possibly imagine. And so that's when I woke up and I said, wow, here at the local level, I had to step it up and I need to be a voice for my community at that table. And so ever since then, I've been involved in multiple leadership training programs like the New American Leaders, where I met Farrah Khan, as well as the New Leaders Council Institute in Los Angeles. And so I've really committed myself to spend the rest of my life fighting for not just my community, but everyone who I consider my family, and that includes everyone on this planet, because as we know, we only have so much time left to address the climate crisis. And that's the final thing I want to talk about, and what really inspired me to run last cycle when I did. In 2015, I took the IPCC's, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's timeline, and it showed the possible scenarios for global temperature increase. And I noticed that all the Paris Accord goals were pointing to 2 degrees centigrade increases in global average temperature. However, recent IPCC reports point out that we are well beyond that trajectory, and we are on an accelerated path towards 4 degrees centigrade increases in global average temperature by the end of the century. And so I got to thinking, like, well, here's this timeline. I've done vision boards before, so I'm gonna take sticky notes and put them on all the dates and years that I feel that I wanna accomplish those goals. So I put helicopter pilot by the time I was 30, like governor by 2050 or something along those lines. And it got me thinking that I was thinking that it had time. And the reality was we don't have time. And I want you to understand how I underscore this urgency. A lot of people use this rhetoric that we have 12 years, 11, 10 years left to address climate change. And that's not true. Decade zero has come and gone, and we are no longer at the point where we can turn around a global average temperature rise and the accelerating effects of that. We're now looking at 2030 as our final deadline to really curb carbon emissions to prevent that 4 degree centigrade increase in global average temperature, but we know that it's gonna take all 10 years to get something as simple like the Green New Deal, the most ambitious legislation that has ever been thought of in this nation and in human history. So I'm running as a candidate for Fullerton City Council on November 3rd, 2020. I ran in the last cycle, but I suspended my campaign to endorse an LGBT fellow activist in my community who did go on to win. And so now we took a strategic approach to make sure that we have a full majority of elected officials who really understand the community, who come from the community, and use evidence-based decision-making in the path forward. So that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you all for that. That was very inspiring. What was the experience like running for office? any particular lessons learned or unusual obstacles that you didn't anticipate?
There's a lot. So I ran at the state level. So the District 54 basically encompasses UCLA, Culver City, a little bit of Mar Vista, Baldwin Hills, Crenshaw. So I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I hadn't run for anything locally. The last thing I ran for was president of the Georgetown Alumni Club, unopposed. So I had no idea, and it was a good thing. Had I known, I wouldn't have had the courage to run. So you guys know I have my PhD in neuroscience, and this was probably the most challenging experience ever in my life. There was anxiety, there was fear, there was stress. I like a lot of sleep, and so I was waking up around 6 in the morning, doing all the things, going to bed around 11 at night, and waking up at 3 in the morning thinking about all the things I needed to do still. So I ran in a special election. It's a reduced period of time. So I raised $161,000 in 83 days. Thank you. To put into perspective, you can max out a check at $4,400. So I had over 100 people contribute to my campaign, and that means I was pretty much 100% of my time every day soliciting funds. And that's something we didn't have to do earning our PhD. That's not something I had to do in any of my jobs. I interviewed well, and it was interesting to learn that it's not about the interviews. It's not about the raising of the money. It's not about knowing policies or performing at town halls. It's all together part of the package of learning how to be a candidate, which is different than learning how to be a successful elected official. And I don't really like to say politician because I think that their job skills are greater than the term politician. But what I also learned that you guys do know that we don't really take seriously is that there are always meetings before the meeting. There's dissertation practice before the dissertation. It's not just like, oh, I hope I'm gonna get my PhD when I give this thesis talk today. There are previous meetings that are set, and that was the most shocking, but not shocking. I just hadn't experienced it. And so there are all these pre-meetings, and I'm still in pre-meetings. Well, I've leveraged all of that experience from last year running into my new position as Chief Policy Director for a nonprofit called California Issues Forum, working hand in hand with the elected officials, a group of elected officials called the New Dems. There were meetings before the meeting before I got that role as well. So that's sort of the tip and big takeaway that I have with me forever.
I have some notes here. Definitely touching upon the fundraising. So I raised $10,000 in a little bit less than 4 months. So fundraising is up there, but connecting with the voters, as Farah mentioned, is really key. I mean, you could be, I don't want to be mean or anything, but you could be one of the village crazy people, and everyone could know you, and you could potentially win just because you connected with people. So I really want to underscore that. But Farah,
not that our opponents were the village crazy people. They're very talented.
Yeah, they're talented. I give it props to them. They get hundreds of votes. So the last thing is making sure you understand what communication means within a campaign or just beyond the campaign itself. A lot of times people have this assumption that scientists don't know how to communicate. And that's not necessarily true. You just know how to communicate on different issues. But when you tie in politics with science, that's when sparks begin to fly. For example, at a recent city council meeting, I presented a 3-minute public comment. And you had to tell a story, introduce yourself, tie in the data, provide a positive vision and also make sure people know how to connect with you, all within 3 minutes. And so a couple of weeks ago, it was raining. It was just raining terribly. And I like to follow climatology Twitter users. So if you're on climate Twitter, definitely look up that hashtag. But I started off with telling the story of how people were afraid of getting home from the city council meeting. Behind me, some Latina mothers were whispering to each other that, wow, it's getting late, the rain is very heavy, like we need to get home to our families because it's dangerous to drive at night. And when I went up to give my public comment, I mentioned that. I said, you know, all of us here, we're devoting our evening to talking about what we really care about. But the reality is that an atmospheric river from the equatorial Pacific is driving a lot of moisture towards the California coast and Fullerton especially. And so it's making it more dangerous to be civically engaged when we have to discuss issues on housing and the environment and saving the open spaces that we have. And so I try to tie in housing, the conservation, so saving Coyote Hills, transportation, as well as the larger global issues, all within this short comment. And fortunately, I could tell I did it well enough that the council members now knew that they had to consider climate change in all the decisions they were making in the planning that they were doing for us. And so understanding how communication is going to work from here on out, where people do understand climate change is our reality, but they don't understand quite how, is going to be the challenge for you all. And I also wanted to ask how many of you are planning on running for office? Raise your hands. And are you all? Raise your hands a little bit higher. Okay.
Definitely. So there's like one,
So,
which is awesome. That's a lot actually in the room. Connect with us. We have lessons learned. I'm here to help. I think that it's really important to have scientists as part of the process in a variety of capacity. Well, whether it's your voice and your vote, or right now, we all have our voice in a variety of capacities. So find me on LinkedIn, send me an email, happy to help. There's always more to learn, and I feel like trial by fire was an amazing way to learn. I took classes before on how to become, have you ever been a candidate before? No, come to this training, and there's nothing like it other than doing it, but happy to help navigate.
Oh, and I think trial by fire is something I can agree with. I mean, I think, I've run for neighborhood council, I ran for budget advocates, and then I ran for assembly district delegate. But those were much smaller elections, and you didn't really necessarily need to raise a ton of money. So it was a lot more just straight grassroots, doing social media, people face-to-face in the community, talking with them. But running for city council is a completely different ballgame. Los Angeles has a lot of very strict ethics rules, which is great because you know that you have to be honest and clean running your campaign and doing your finance. But it also means that it's challenging, and that means that it's not, this is not the Jamie show. This is, okay, hire a professional treasurer and then be able to know that you are responsible for raising the funds that you need to raise in order to pay the bills that you committed to paying the salaries of the staff that you are going to need to hire later. And just understanding that that's actually where some of my business background, because I have an MBA, which is not traditional for a science, so for a scientific researcher to have, but that's where some of that has been really helpful, because that formal management training and understanding how to manage a budget and all of that. But I think, so I announced on Thursday, and I kind of dropped, like Beyonce dropped an album without announcing it, without telling anybody that I was going to do it, because for me, that was the way it was going to work with, media things that cost free 99. So I, and it's been it's been a little bit whirlwind. I mean, just a lot of people reaching out to me, and it's good. It's really positive, but I think it underscores how disciplined I have to be with my time. And I think all of us who have been through really difficult science coursework, PhDs, master's degrees in hard sciences, can appreciate the level of discipline that it takes to get everything that you need to get done. And so, just remembering that and managing your time really well. That's something that I know has served me well in just the last few days after I've announced. And I think that, in your runs in the future, I think will serve you very well. So
I'll make one more point. So one person bravely raised his hand when we asked who is thinking about running for office. I think all you, definitely should run for office. Not only will it make you a good person that actually speaks with the community, but it will help develop you into a better scientist on a local, state, and global stage. I think that the skills that I've learned in my time running for city council in the last election really helped me grow as a person, but just know that you can take those skills from the campaign into everything that you do throughout your life.
And this is what's great about having a panel is I absolutely disagree. I think that I'm an extreme extrovert. I say extreme because if I'm alone for more than maybe 2 hours, I jump on my phone and I start communicating with people. It wasn't terrifying to do that, and I learned a lot, but it was also something that really challenges your integrity. You start getting to this point where you want to win so badly. You have this perspective that you are the right person for the job, and you don't run otherwise. And so you make choices based on your holding true to your integrity. So mine was a state election, so I had a variety of ways to communicate with voters, and so I sent out about 40,000 pieces of mail, 6 different pieces of mail, and 2 of my pieces were saying, hey, you voters, don't let other politicians tell you how to vote. Actually read about the candidates and decide for yourselves who has the best resume to represent you and your values. And it was a complete decision because the woman who won had Kamala Harris endorsing her. But Kamala Harris didn't take my call. So I wanted to point that out to voters. And that was really tough because, was it a hit piece? Was I slandering her? And I think that we had some choices that were a little aggressive for me. And declining that when the polling said it would change people's votes to me if I went more aggressive, and I said I can't do it. Making those little decisions is really, really hard, and I had quite a few of those that I had to face in this election. So I don't think it's for everyone, and I think that there are really, really valuable ways to be part of the political conversation without running and without being an elected official. But a lot of it does have to start with your local community, your Dem clubs, or your Republican clubs. I ran as a Democrat, and I think that there's an opportunity to find your voice and find your way, even if it's not an elected official position.
Completely agree with that.
I was curious as to get sort of a response and get to know your line of thinking as the thoughts on the importance of scientists to engage in policy and to get sort of their first steps in achieving more agency in the process.
Well, I think just the way that we look at data, like we are trained to look at data and be able to interpret it. So I think having that background can be really helpful when you have situations where there's a lot of it in front of you that you have to kind of look at quickly and be able to discern what is the most significant piece that to that conversation that's in question, to the question that's going to come to call that you're going to have to vote for or against or not vote, on it. and then you have to be able to make that decision. There's also this this idea of presenting the information in a new way. So, for example, on budget advocates, I had a chance to write a abstract for the white paper that this organization puts out every year, which provides suggestions about what departments should do to make sure that funds are allocated properly. And so instead of doing it kind of as it traditionally had been done, I decided to kind of structure it like an academic paper because I thought that it would get people engaged in a different way and present the information with not just saying this information that I knew to be facts, but present it anecdotally because there's no citations, like citations, so they can go back and check all those links, and they won't be able to say, oh, that's not true. No, it's cited here in multiple places. It's true, and create that kind of like in-depth, detailed analysis that you don't always see in a public document that goes to the general public, and start the conversation in a new way. And I think being able to start the conversation in a new way is really important, and being able to show the issues from a perspective that people haven't thought of before and hadn't made the connection with is something that we really need to do right now. You know, going back to climate change and like environmental prejudice, that's something that's really an issue, at least in communities that have been historically subject to redlining and been on the bad end of that. And a lot of people don't even talk about redlining and how that could, that's, you know, talking about the national conversation on gentrification and what is happening in communities basically nationwide. Some of these environmental hazards have been placed because these areas were redlined and victim to systemic disinvestment and prejudice. And being able to talk about that in a way that presents the data and the facts in depth, in detail, and, you know, presenting that there's correlation between these factors and this is why. And, you know, having people who understand how to do that and do that well is really important in mainstream conversations. So
I think it's really important to have scientists as part of the voting population for the elected officials, because it takes a variety of perspectives, a lot of variety of talents, variety of experiences to do more, better, faster, to do more, and our policies we're requiring more policies, more behavioral changes. So to do more, to do it better, we need an interdisciplinary approach. My science is in neuroscience, and that allows for biologists and chemists and physicists all to work together. So my background in science was really interdisciplinary, and so I think in our political realm we need interdisciplinary as well. So we need the lawyers, we need the teachers, we need the police officers, we need formerly incarcerated, formerly homeless, you know, all these types of people together doing more, better, and then to do it faster, it just takes a variety of minds coming together and really cooperating and compromising to do that more, better, faster. And that's what I also teach in my, I teach it at the graduate school level, a course in policy design. And so I'm constantly saying, okay guys, we need to do more, think better, do it faster, and that really takes scientists at the table, and we're underrepresented, especially at the state level. So we are trained to ask unasked questions, and that's not a perspective coming from a variety of subjects. At the PhD level, yes, across all disciplines, unasked question, and that's really important. So I'm all for people that are in higher education, science backgrounds, participating in our legislative process.
Couple examples on this. First, I believe that everyone should engage in the political process to as much as they can. If they have a limited capacity, then also recognize that and, you know, take care of yourself first, because first and foremost, we're humans, and scientists second. And I want people to understand why scientists are needed at the political level, especially within those elected positions. Here in Orange County, one of our larger water districts or water agencies is the Orange County Water District. And I kept a tab on what water issues, what inequities we face in North Orange County and Fullerton. And believe it or not, North Orange County, Fullerton especially, is home to one of the worst Superfund sites and the worst contaminations in the West Coast. And so I was wondering, why aren't people talking about that? Like, why don't people understand that the principal aquifer we use to draw our water from is under attack, and by extension, our people, and predominantly low-income communities of color, because of redlining policies in the 50s. And I went in depth. I went to every Orange County Water District meeting, every water advisory board, asked my friends at the Union of Concerned Scientists. I have a childhood friend who's the director of communications in DC there. I asked everyone that I could, city staff, and I gathered all that data. I presented it publicly multiple times throughout the year, made it a foundation in my campaign, and it turned out that I was correct. People could not refute that data, and it shaped the way that the campaigns approached water. And it shapes the way that the city council now approaches increasing the water rates and determining who is going to sit on the Orange County Water District Board. So you can do a lot, not even as an elected official, just providing that data and just putting it out there for the public, but also you can do a lot more and be more effective when you take that data as part of your campaign and you communicate it well enough that people understand there's a serious threat to their livelihoods and their quality of life. And I don't do that to scare people into action, but to underscore that the elected officials who have been in those positions for over a decade have done very little to address these decades-long problems of contamination. And so that's what I see scientists doing more and more, engaging at the political level. And if you're focused more on air quality, I serve on the South Coast Air Quality Management, SCAQMD's Youth Council. And all the information and knowledge that I've gained from that, from engaging in that level, has made me realize that we have a very slanted, very biased way of thinking at the board level, which determines a lot of the regulations for how communities of color especially are disproportionately impacted by carbon emissions, by diesel emissions. So there are a lot of ways to get involved as a scientist in the political realm. You don't just have to be an elected official, but you definitely uplift those that and the communities that you come from when you do run for office.
In terms of the process of running for office, have you moved from, like, let's say, specializing in one area more to a generalist? Did you have a process for doing that? Becoming sort of more knowledgeable on a wider variety of topics than maybe you would typically be?
Yeah, so you do these town halls, or I did these town halls. We don't call them debates anymore because you're not supposed to be adversarial. And they ask you all the questions. So I was just like, no, health and brain. Like, that's all I got. You know, maybe even a little workforce development, because I work at RAND, actually, RAND Corporation. And so I kept asking my mentors, I'm like, okay, what are the topics they're gonna give me? And it was just like, well, you know, the big ones in your community, you know, immigration, education, because UCLA, housing, homelessness, transportation. I was like, whoa, like, that's all of them, like, all of them. So my first process of learning was, you know, reading the newspaper. So I read the LA Times first to get the hot topics. And then, as a good scientist that I am, I started reading different aspects of the problem and trying to get a handle on why it wasn't fixed. Because obviously it's not fixed because it's a complicated problem. So the campaign, my strategy was, you have about 2 minutes to speak, so I was doing 3 things. I would repeat the question so everyone knew that I understood it. I would give my family or my background in how it related to me, so therefore I related to the problem. And 3, I would give a brief solution that didn't make me seem ridiculously elitist, since I was called Dr. T'Pring in the campaign, but that it sounded like I understood the facets of working toward a solution. And then no one expects an answer, because if I had an answer, I would have already given it to elected officials to actually implement right then. So repeat the question, frame it in my perspective, how it related to me or my family, and then give some possible examples of how others could move forward on it.
Okay.
That was my general list. Yeah, on all the topics, all of them.
I mean, for me, I had to become kind of generalist just by my neighborhood council role, because they don't give you training. They just, got elected in kind of a low-key special election, the way that each neighborhood council has different bylaws, so they do it different ways. So I got, the board elected me, and I got dropped in. Next meeting, they're like, all right, show up. Here's some, take these tests before you get there, otherwise you can't vote on anything. And then you just wait for your inbox to fill up with all of the background information, and sometimes no background information. And sometimes the only background information you get is the presentation that they give you, or if it's somebody coming outside to ask you for something, they come and they'll state their case, and you have to make a decision, and you can abstain. But the thing with abstention is that I think it's Robert's rules, abstention is still a yes vote. So even though you admit, like, I don't feel comfortable voting on this because I don't know about this, and you can say that during the discussion, be like, I don't have enough information about this. You can ask to table it for another meeting to give more time, but if other people feel comfortable enough to proceed with the vote, so an abstention might be the only thing you can do, but it's still a yes vote, and according to the rules, even if that's not how you feel comfortable voting. So I just sort of got dropped in. But again, going back to what I said earlier about the discipline that you need to get through the hard coursework that you go through when you're studying STEM, you just sort of read. You start doing the deep dives. I started to like all the pages that had important news, just like you did with reading in the news. Like all the pages. If you see something, if you hear somebody talking about it, ask them. If it makes sense to ask them at that point in the conversation, and trial by fire. So, yeah.
Whether I've become more of a generalist, two things, yes and no. I was known as the climate guy or the water guy. That was my label as a candidate in the field of 5 other candidates. And that helped to a certain extent. But I knew that I was an expert in other areas, and people weren't recognizing that. I was often ignored when I talked about housing or things what would be considered outside my range. And I don't know if you've ever felt ignored before, but for a long time, I've understood that when I feel ignored, it takes me back to when I really cared about defending my family, my little sister. And I didn't like the way society treated her just because she had Down syndrome or trisomy 21. And for a long time in my life, I've always felt very passionate about defending those who are ignored, and having been ignored myself, defending myself. And I would take it up to the people who, blatantly said, like, you don't know what you're talking about, even though I had all the data and the facts and statistics. I would go talk with them one-on-one, and I would, treat them like a person and not shout back or fire back from the stage just because it was in that moment. But I have become more and more of a generalist, touching on transportation, housing, and everything beyond the environment and climate, because that's what's required of us. We need to know what's going to be on the agenda. If you're not an expert on something that will be on the agenda, you have 3 days to figure that out. And you need to ask everyone you know, especially other people you can lean on, because it's not realistic to expect you to know every single thing. You have to tap into networks of other scientists that will help provide the data. When an immigration issue came up, I don't profess to be an expert on immigration, and my family has been impacted, so I know I have a personal attachment with that. But I reached out to anthropologists who had their dissertations directly on sanctuary cities, on immigration cases, and they essentially provided some of the talking points I needed to elaborate, just the credibility I was wanting to establish in the 3-minute public comment that I had. So definitely go beyond, use an interdisciplinary approach, but it's not bad if you are recognized as a specialist in water or climate, because sometimes that's what gets people most motivated to come out and volunteer or donate to your campaign.
So at this point, we'd like to go ahead and open up the panel to questions from the audience. I'm going to be going around along with Evelyn. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll try and get to you.
Hi. I've got a comment leading to a question. Dr. Peccato, I know you since you've been an elected member of a science professional society. My comment is about maybe in reaction to the hesitancy of people in the audience not wanting to run for a public office, perhaps maybe in these professional societies, SFN, SACNAS, or so on, might be an opportunity for a younger generation to get engaged, because in my opinion, a lot of these organizations have been really slow to be advocates for sort of civic and political issues. Could you comment?
Right, so just to repeat the question, we have known each other for a while, and when I moved to UC Irvine to do my postdoc, I lived with him for a couple of months, so thank you. And your wife, yes, with his family. Yeah, that's funny, as I was getting engaged and everything. So I was also a student member on the board of SACNAS when I was graduating to my first year of my postdoc, but it's a student position. So there was an election process there as well. I think it's really important to participate, again, going back to the voice and the vote. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to participate at a level in which you desire or belong or feel suited for. I think that there is a role in professional societies to play in the shaping or advocacy of our elected officials. It's just really challenging, and right now there's a lot of I'm going to call it the old guard, the old way of thinking, that it's not the role for national organizations, specifically professional societies, to play a role in shaping our next elected officials. I think that that's the wrong way to think. I think that there are roles to not endorse an individual, but to give individuals that share your values and vision a platform in which to speak. There are legal requirements for nonprofits not to endorse people for part of their nonprofit status, but that doesn't mean that you can't give a platform or highlight those elected or candidates that share your vision and values. So I hope that all of you guys go back to your societies of a variety of types, because money and endorsements and platforms are really important, especially as you have to get more and more people to vote for you. So I had over 50,000 people vote for me on the final election. Thank you. And we had about 120,000 people vote in that election. And it certainly wasn't because I knocked on all those doors. I passed out about 4,500 mail pieces or handouts because I went to churches and synagogues and town halls, things like that. But clearly that doesn't reach 50,000 people that voted for me. There are other ways, mail, but a lot of things take money. So if you guys can contribute to a candidate $50, what's even better is you can go to your organizations and say, I have a great candidate, let's hear her or him speak, bring them in, provide that platform, and now in 1 hour or 2 hours, you have your entire organization able to hear from that person. And that's a collection of funds, but more than that, you're actually reaching people that have the opportunity to vote and send out tweets and emails and collect names that way. So providing a role from the professional societies, that's exactly what they can do. They don't have to give money, they don't have to give the endorsement, which are also valuable, but they can collect the people.
Thank you so much for speaking today. As a PhD student, one of the things that would stop me from running for office is the fear of coming in second, as Dr. Peccato said. So how do you and how have you dealt with those fears and the feelings of coming in second place?
So I proudly suspended my campaign in order to run in a future election because becoming a candidate made me realize that engaging at the political level, especially here in Orange County, is a lifelong commitment. And I want to encourage you all to set a very strong intention, a really strong intention to make this part of your life's work. You're in a PhD program, you know it's a many year-long effort, and it's the same for the political level. It takes many years to get major infrastructure or public works projects passed. And that's what we need now. We need major infrastructure projects to help address housing and transportation, homelessness, and et cetera. So think about the commitment you're willing to make for your PhD and translate that into the commitment you want to make on society at large. So that's my response for that. And don't be afraid of coming in second, because if it is a lifelong commitment, you'll likely be crazy enough to run again.
Yeah, you're probably likely crazy enough to run again. What I did, before I declared, I asked my husband, because this takes a family decision. I said, okay, like, you cool? I'm gonna run. We have to do some things. I don't know what those things are, but I heard we have to do some things. And you'll probably have to say some things. But we'll figure that out. Do you have any problems? And he's a 110 supporter of mine. And so he was just like, I have one concern. You don't lose. And you're probably gonna lose. And I was like, probably not. Okay, but if I were to lose because I've never done this before, how will it affect me? He's like, you're gonna be devastated. Will you go to therapy? And I said yes. And so while, some people were realistic, I was realistic with myself. It takes a lot of money. $450,000 was the max out that I accepted, but I got to raise that twice, and I didn't reach it. It was $160,000, and it takes a lot of money. So I had 3 main mentors. One never, ever said, what are you gonna do when you lose? 2 did. And one didn't, and so I appreciated every minute with that person, because that was just not in our vocabulary, and it kept me focused and motivated. And then I dealt with the realities of what would it mean if I came in second, or third, or fourth, or whatever. If I didn't come in number 1. And it was interesting. I cried 5 times. Probably I've cried 5 times in 5 years, but I cried 5 times in 3 months, and not a single time did I even shed a tear when I got that second place result. So I think for me, the fear, I don't lose. I can't believe I got lost 3 times. You just sort of push through and know that in losing what I was seeking, I've really crafted out the career of my dreams. So it's not about not getting that, it's what am I gonna do next?
Maybe I'm nuts, but I don't think there's such a thing as losing, at least in the election that I've chosen to run. And the reason being is that on our LA City Council right now, there are no millennials, none. And there's never been a woman in the seat that I'm running for. Not only that, but going back to that, we have to start these conversations. Bernie Sanders came in second place, and he's changed the conversation entirely. And so if what I do is change the conversation, then I still view that as a win. I don't think there's, for me, and I've experienced loss. I'm used to it. Like, life has not been, I've not led the easiest life. And so if, if it's supposed to happen, it's gonna happen. And if it's not, then I'm still gonna start the conversations that I believe need to be started. So that's how I feel about it.
Okay. Hi, my name is Melissa, and I'm a 4th-year PhD candidate. Something that you guys have all made really clear is that to be a successful candidate, you have to get people to be wanting to come out and interact with you in addition to social media. But something I was a little bit surprised that none of you talked about was challenges surrounding gender, race, or even having a science background in general, which I think a lot of times has negative stigma kind of associated with it in certain groups. So I don't know if any of you experienced that, maybe not as much in Southern California, but if you could talk to that at all, or things you've heard from others that have gone through this related to that.
I'll jump in here. I received and faced challenges from places I wasn't expecting. From people I expected to be my allies, especially affinity organizations like LGBT groups and et cetera. I was expecting their support. And I quickly realized that that's not the case. I think what you're pointing to is viability and what makes a viable candidate. I want to leave it at that because I don't want to get too into the weeds of rivalries that form between different candidates. That's to be expected, that candidates are facing each other for one position. But I think if we think about working together strategically as a team to get full majority elected officials on all these different agencies and boards, that's a different story. And so I just faced challenges and obstacles from people that I thought I could trust. And over time, I realized that I just needed to strengthen my mental health and fortify my spirit in order to deal with that, because it will continue. I can't control other people.
Yeah, I was really fortunate to be running with a smart, talented woman of color. So while we did have race and gender politics happen in our race, it wasn't between she and I. We were both, demographically representing the same groups, although coming from very different perspectives with very different talent backgrounds. With the science perspective, so I had a piece of mail that said, we have enough of these, and it was like politicians in suits, and we need more of these, scientists in lab coats. And right, I had my white lab coat that I was just like, I had to go out and buy that because I come from a carpet lab, like computer science stuff. And there was a little pushback of why? Why do you think we don't need more lawyers? They know the political realm. So that was interesting to try to navigate that. I didn't really focus on that. I was like, if you don't understand the value of a scientist, I'm not going to try to convince you. I can just move on to the other, 200,000 people that can vote here. So I was really fortunate in mine. Now, that's not always true. I think that there is discrimination that happens with your gender and your race and your age. We were also very similar ages, so I was just slightly under 40 at the time, and she was just slightly over 40 at the time, so we were both eligible for that exennial sort of endorsement, and we both have experiences that placed us firmly in the millennial category and understanding those concerns, and then the older adult category. So for me, it was just that we were very similarly, had similar demographic backgrounds.
Thank you. No, as far as people responding to me being, a scientific researcher, people are actually really excited about that. I think because they haven't met a scientist, or they don't know very many of them, and they'll be like, "Can you speak at my kid's school?" And I'm totally on board to do that, because I think it's sort of so in our neighborhoods, Northeast and East Side, so we have Cal State LA, and actually they've been recognized by the National Science Foundation for producing the largest number of Latino PhD graduates. and in the sciences, even if they don't graduate from Cal State with a PhD, they go on to go get their PhD. And we have a lot of schools having robotics teams, a lot of kids that are being geared for and sort of guided towards careers in STEAM. And so I think having somebody that has that background in the neighborhood doing this work out in the community is something that people have really appreciated. So I haven't received any really negative feedback on that outside of, you know, the occasional people thinking like science, like all you do is science though, you know, and then having that conversation, kind of what I started to touch upon earlier about some of the links between regular everyday issues that we talk about, affordable housing, immigrant rights, and how that sort of affects all of us because we're part of the community. Again, for me, like, representation is everything. I'm a Latina Middle Eastern American, and so I think it's important for people to see somebody and have that example there, to know that this could be for them. Because when I was younger, like, politics never seemed like something that could ever be accessible to me. And even being a scientist sometimes felt like that's not something accessible to me. Like, you know, but ultimately I knew that I was gonna go to college one day, and that eventually it would evolve to be possible for me. But I think seeing somebody else going through it and doing that kind of work is really helpful for others and encouraging. So.
Hi, so I'm a postdoc, and as someone mentioned, we don't make a lot of money. And so I think that, and lots of science positions are like that. And I think when you think of someone who's running for office, you think of like running for office is a full-time job. So how did you do that, right? Like, how do you afford to run for office, I guess, is probably why a lot of people don't raise their hands, right? Because it's like, how do you do that, you know? So just wondering.
I wish Jess Phoenix was here because she would have a different perspective running for Congress. So I ran in a special, and because I was a viable candidate within the first 10 days, I did take a leave of absence without pay. I have a partner who is financially stable, so we were able to live off of our savings plus his salary for me to take 11 weeks off of work. That's because the election was like 95 days from start to finish. If I were to be running now for 2020, my company wouldn't allow it, so that's a different story, but most companies do. There are, you know, if you're a teacher, you can run as a teacher. If you're an architect, you can run as an architect. My company is a nonpartisan institution that does public policy, so I can't run as a Democrat or a Republican. So what people do is plan for it and prepare for it. So it doesn't take money personally, but you have to be able to spend the time to participate. And at the state level, you usually need to raise about $100,000, that's the rule of thumb, from your friends and family to run for state office. Before you would get the treasurer or the fundraiser or the people that you need to help fuel your campaign. So you don't have to be wealthy, but you do have to have that financial stability, and then you just start collecting money along the way, and it takes up all your time. So for me, my campaign manager and I said, I get 4 hours on Saturday, 4 hours on Sunday, and then everything else is his time. So I had 4 hours with my friends, and then 4 hours exclusively with my husband, where I could have my phone close to me, but unless it's an emergency, we don't answer it. And that's also, regardless of the finance cash, it's also just your life for a while. You guys are in a longer race, so I'm not sure how it affect your jobs as much. All town halls are in the evening. I did my questionnaires, the interview questionnaires myself, which is not always typical, and they were like, oh, you're a good student. I was like, yes, I am, thank you. And that you could do on the weekends and sort of piecemeal now if you had like a 2-year planning period of time.
So I mean, I'm early on in my process, but as far as you know, balancing work and civic engagement, I mean, my neighborhood council position is completely volunteer. And so it's kind of like my 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. Like, you know, I'm sending emails at 2 a.m. Like that's how it is. But it's really just, at least right now at this stage, like just time management, going back again to like having that discipline to like schedule yourself and make sure that, you know, you set realistic goals and sometimes set unrealistic goals so that maybe you'll come a little bit closer to to what you hope to get done. At least that works for me. But you know, if there comes a point where, you know, it seems that I have to take a leave, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But you know, I'm hoping that not. You know, I'm hoping that, you know, I can continue to do my work while I'm doing this. But you know, I do want to point out what you said is that I think just the system is not really set up for people who kind of are living paycheck to paycheck to be, or who have daytime traditional job schedules to be involved. And I find that a lot of the time I'm one of the only millennials in the room, and we're in this kind of stage right now where there's a lot of turnover, where a lot of people kind of want to hand off some of these volunteer positions and some of these volunteer work to the next generation, and they're looking around and there aren't that many of us. And I think it's largely because the system is not easily set up for us. So.
Who asked that question? Thank you for that question. It makes us, it brings us back into reality, keeps us grounded, because I worked my butt off during the campaign. I was working on Measure W, the LA County Sustainability Master Plan, and other water and climate related issues in LA County, driving back to Fullerton, knocking on doors in the evening, especially working class folks, and then spending all my weekends knocking on doors. Days that I didn't have work, I would knock on doors for elderly residents and voters because they were at home. It's more accessible. So who mentioned time management? Yeah. That's what it is. Like, you got to do the work. You got to pay the bills. You got to do the campaign funds. You're spending 3 to 4 hours a day calling for fundraising in your car, like driving with the Bluetooth. So I didn't spend a single penny from my funds on my campaign because I don't make a lot of money in the first place. So it is doable, but you have to have your heart and soul in it. You have to be ready for spending late nights till midnight, 1 in the morning, working on campaign issues, and then waking up in time to get to a 7 a.m. meeting. And hopefully you fit food in throughout that entire day. So yeah. That's how it is.
That's no joke. I lost 10 pounds in the first 30 days because the worst that it got was, I'm also not very sensitive to food, so it was okay. I had a soup lunch, ended up having a town hall that I didn't know was gonna have happen in the evening, had pictures for the mailers in the morning, so I had to get my hair done, so it was up at like 6:30, hair done, another thing, pictures at 1, and so I didn't eat again until like 7 o'clock the next day. So eating, I should have had granola bars, like I don't know what we were thinking, like just something, bananas, I don't know, smoothies. So that's a real thing, is you have to remember to eat. I invested in myself. You can take out a loan, you can loan your campaign money. And so I said, you know what? After a couple of cool endorsements, I was like, I'm going in. I put in $25,000. I had that to lose. I mean, no one wants to lose that, but I was just confident that I would gain it back. And I didn't have enough time to like have the checks come in and wait for the printing and stuff. So I loaned myself $25,000 and I received everything except for $6,300 back. So for 3 months, I spent $6,300 learning the process. So that was comfortable with me. I think we're out of time.
Yes. So if you all would join me in thanking Tepring, Jamie, and Jose. And we'd also like to thank you with certificates of appreciation and some awesome swag for today.